The Princess of the Chalet School. Chapter 13. Some startling news. Afterwards, when everything was over and done with, someone asked the two girls why they said nothing about the meeting and the two men's behavior on the station platform at Sparts. Joey's reply that they hadn't really thought it worth mentioning, since she knew that her sister expected a kind of bodyguard for the princess, while Elizaveta knew that royalty has to submit to precautions of this kind, seemed to them to account for things quite satisfactorily. Their questioner, who was no less a person than the king of Belsornia himself, smiled. As things have turned out, he said, no real harm has come of it. But when there are unusual happenings, and you know that none of the elders know of them, it is generally better to mention them to someone in charge. All that, however, came much later. At the time, neither of the children said anything about it on the day it occurred, and the next day saw them all too busy preparing for the guide tests, which came on the Saturday, to think of anything outside of guides. Joey was to make an effort to get her needlewoman's badge. She had tried for it 3 times already, but her sewing hadn't been up to standards for the first time. The second time, her mending had let her down. And this time, she had made a big effort, and her garments had passed muster with Frau Marini, who was examiner for the rest. And now she had only her patch and darning to do, and the cutting out of buttonholes and sewing of gathers into a band to get through. Elizaveta was taking ambulance and child nurse, and she wandered about distractedly, murmuring the names of the principal bones to herself, till she finally made an idiot of herself, as Joey said, by replying, when Miss Wilson asked her where the Carpathians were, "Oh, they're in the bones that are in the hand." Her agitated explanation, made after Miss Wilson had finished telling her what she thought of her, that metacarpal was not very unlike Carpathians, brought her no satisfaction. It seemed to the excited child as if the day would never end. When at last cafe brought to the close the school hours, there was a general sigh of relief to be heard from the various classes, even the seniors who were not above that. "Thank goodness! No more lessons till Monday," exclaimed Juliet Cochrane in the privacy of the prefect's room, where she was putting away her possessions. "I feel as if this term will never end." "I feel rather that way too," acknowledged Grizel. "There's a sort of waiting feeling in the air, you know. You know what I mean?" Juliet nodded. "I do. I feel it myself. I don't know what it is, but it's a restless sensation. I wonder if Madame is going to spring something on us." "Such as what?" demanded Bet, a very pretty Trolline, who was one of the original pupils of the school. Bet had learned to speak English almost perfectly, and she used her English slang, was a source of mystery to her companions, who would never understand how it was that she never made mistakes. Grizel looked across at her and laughed. "I don't know, and I'm sure that Juliet can't say either. Perhaps we're going to have a new building erected." "I hope not." Bet was quite decided at that point. "I should hate to leave the chalet. I've always been so glad that it was the babies who were sent to La Petite Chalet and not us." "So was I," said Juliet, leaving her locker and coming over to the window where the other two were standing. "I don't think it's that, though, Bet, so you needn't get worried over that." "Then what do you think it is?" demanded Grizel. Juliet shook her head. "Don't know, I'm sure." Herein, as a tap sounded at the door, the robin appeared in reply with an air of deep mystery on her face. "Juliet, will you come to Madame now, please? She wants you." "The solution to the mystery," Grizel called after her as she went. "More than likely," retorted the head girl. "Take the robin's hand. Come along, Robin." "We're going to have tea with Madame," the baby informed her as they walked to the study. "It's a lovely tea with English tea and cakes." "Who are we?" asked Juliet. "You and me and Joey." The robin had just got over her difficulty with English jays and was very proud of herself. She still made mistakes if she was excited or in a hurry, but she remembered it in time now. "How fabulous," said Juliet. By this time they had reached the door, and there was Miss Bethany waiting for them, with Joey standing beside her. "Come along, girls," she said. "We are going to take our tea to the Pines, and the others are to have cafe in the garden. Juliet, take that basket, dear, and Robin can carry this one. Now come along." They set out, Joey bearing the thermos flask, and the head herself with the basket containing milk and cakes. The others saw them going. "Tea with Madame," exclaimed Bet. "Well, there's nothing to be gained there, then. It must be imagination." "What are you talking about?" demanded Grizel. "Of all the mixed sentences, that is the worst I've ever heard. What do you mean?" "Our feelings," replied Bet vaguely. "Oh, I see. Well, Juliet is Madame's ward, and Robin is something of the same kind, I suppose, and Joey is her sister. They like to be together." "I know, and they very seldom are." "There's Rosalie. Let's join her." The three who had gone with the head were seen no more that night, and the robin was always sent to bed very early, as she was delicate and needed a good deal of rest. Juliet vanished out of sight, and was only found when the others went to bed. Already between the sheets, her cubicle curtains were tightly drawn, and when Grizel would have opened them to ask where she had been, she was sternly ordered to go away for goodness' sake, and leave me in peace. Much wondering, she did as she was told, for Juliet's tone warned her that there was to be no trifling tonight. As for Jo, she was in the study, helping her sister to turn out a drawer that needed it badly. She was sent to bed too, for like Robin, she was not a robust child, and the long day of the picnic had tired her. Also, she was rather excited by what her sister had told the three of them, even though she had known part of it before. The next day brought the tests, and the girls all turned up to breakfast, looking especially neat and trim, with their uniforms very smart, and all their accoutrements polished to the last degree. "Thank goodness it will soon be over now," sighed Margia, who was taking her naturalist badge, and was very nervous in consequence. She was an unobservant young person, and this test had meant hard work for her. "It's far worse to have to play to Herr Ansel," declared Frida, who was going in for the musicians. Frida played the harp, and her own master, a man from Innsbruck, was gentle in the extreme, willing to go over and over the work till his pupil saw her fault, and never losing either patience or temper. Herr Ansel frequently lost both. Frustruck over, however, the girls fled to the schoolroom to be sure that everything was ready, and then went off to their morning tasks before returning to the big schoolroom for prayers. Once prayers were over, they were settled at their tests, and there was quietness in the school until 12:30 saw the end of the morning's work, and they ran out into the garden for a rest before Meta Jensen. "What was the matter last night?" demanded Grizel of the head girl, as the latter joined them. "Was anything wrong?" "No," said Juliet briefly. "What did you think of the health test, anyone?" Several people had taken the test, and there was an instant chorus of answers. The general opinion was that Dr. Jim, who was responsible for it, had gone out of his way to make the questions unpleasant. In the chatter over it, Grizel's question was forgotten, and the test's discussion lasted them through the break and the meal as well. After Miss Jensen As it was a hot day, they all went to lie down for an hour before beginning work again. The tests were always finished within the one day, and it meant that day was pretty well occupied. At 2:30, those who had not yet finished went back to the schoolrooms, and the others lazed about the garden with books and work and puzzles. Jolie and Juliet both had tests in the afternoon, and it was late before they were finished. The head appeared at cafe and informed them all that she was going to let them go bathing later on. It has been so hot today, she said, that the water ought to be just right. You can all get undressed in half an hour time and be ready to go by 6 o'clock tonight. Little ones may stay up till 7 o'clock. There was a buzz of joyful chatter when she had gone, and they all loved bathing in the evening, and it was not often allowed. The Tarnsey is partly fed by spring in its bed, and they tend to keep it very cold. Miss Bethany was always rather afraid of cramp from this, and preferred that they should bathe during the day when the sun was on the water. They were all at the meeting place at the time she had named, and they went joyfully down to the lake, talking and laughing all the time. Nearly everyone could swim, even the robin, being able to manage breaststroke. They all frolicked about, splashing each other, surfacing, diving, and having races. The small ones were sent in very soon, and trotted off quite happily to their meal in bed, while the others sported about for a while longer. The water was beautifully warm, and they were very reluctant to leave it when Miss Durant blew her whistle. They soon dressed, and then sauntered out into the garden. Their meal was ready shortly, and when it was over, there was only a short time left to the Middles. They were to go to bed early, as they had had such a full day. When the staff had taken their departure, Juliet turned to the other prefects. "Get the girls together," she said. "I have something to tell them." Grizel shot a glance at her. "Mystery," she said. Juliet shook her head. "You'll hear in a minute," she replied curtly. There was a round-up, and presently the school, with the exception of the juniors, was gathered together on the lawn. "Sit down," said Juliet. "I've something to tell you." Juliet, who had arrived with the rest, suddenly looked wise, but she sat down in silence, an example followed by the others. What was Juliet going to say to them? The head girl wasted no time in beating about the bush. "I've asked you to come here," she began, "to tell you that Madame wishes you to know that she is going to be married at the end of July." There was a startled gasp. The girls had known that the wedding would take place some time soon, but they had not expected it yet. The news that the date was fixed came as a shock to them. Grizel recovered herself first. "So that's the mystery?" she said. "Well, we might have guessed it, if we had thought hard enough." "Madame married?" cried Margia. "Oh, how awful! Simply ghastly! Terrible!" The exclamations went round. The girls had never thought of this. "What on earth does she want to get married for yet?" demanded Evandine in somewhat quarrelsome tone. "Well, they'll have been engaged more than a year," Grizel reminded her. "But won't she teach in the school any more?" Frida sounded aghast. "Why, it won't be the Chalet School without Madame." "Where will they live, Joey?" Margia turned to Joe, as being the one likely to know most about the matter. "They'll live in the new chalet Jem has had built above the Sonolap," replied Joey gloomily. "Won't she teach us any more then? With a house to look after?" Joey spoke in her most sarcastic tone. "Don't be silly." Margia retired crushed, and Frida took up the tale. "Did Madame say when, Juliet?" "Yes, it will be on July the 27th, 3 days after we break up," said the head girl in tones almost as gloomy as Joey's. "Well," said Evandine, and she pronounced it Well, I suppose she must get married sometime, but I wish she'd left it till we were through with school. This was the general feeling for the moment. No one could imagine the Chalet School without Miss Bethany. Who will be head mistress next term? Inquired Elisaveta. Mademoiselle will, said Joey. Then she got up from the grass. I just want to say one thing. I think you're all jolly selfish about it. She wants to be married, and she has every right to be. It's just as rotten for anyone, 'cause Marie and Egan will be going with her, and she's going to take Rufus too. So do stop grousing about it when we are round anyhow, and think of her a little. With this she stalked off, leaving the others staring after her. That is quite right, said Juliet. After all, it's bad for us. It's worse for Joey, because she will have to be here in term time, and she's never been away from Madame in her life. It's time the Middles were grouping upstairs now. The Middles rose and went in silence. They were thinking hard enough, though. Chapter 14. The Strange Men Again. Naturally, after that piece of news, nothing else had any chance of occupying the thoughts of the school all the next week. The girls were divided between sorrow for themselves, sympathy for Joe and the robin, and rejoicing over the head's happiness. Nothing else was mentioned, and lessons were rather sent to the background. Then on the following Wednesday a letter came for Elisaveta, which turned the thoughts of them all to her concerns. Dr. Tracy had written to say that her father had had a bad fall from his horse and was suffering from concussion and a broken leg. At the same time, the king had written to Miss Bethany to tell her that the crown prince was very ill, and that under no circumstances was his little daughter to attempt to come to him. If things went well, he would be over the danger in a short time. If they went badly, she would not be in time to see her father alive. In any case, Cosimo was a danger to the child, who was a great favorite with the people of Belsornia, as he was hated, and it was very necessary that there should be no public demonstration in her favor, as was almost certain to occur if anything happened to the crown prince. Madge took the poor child in her study and kept her there for the rest of the day, with only Joey and the robin to see her. A wire was expected hourly, for the king's letter had said that whichever way things went, they must move quickly. The crown prince had been poorly for some days before this occasion, and his only chance lay in preserving his strength as far as possible. You will tell me as soon as the wire comes, Elisaveta pleaded, clinging to Madge. Yes, darling, as soon as ever I hear, replied Madge, holding her closely. Try to be brave. Remember, Dr. Tracy is a wonderful doctor. God willing, I believe he will pull your father through. Yes, whispered Elisaveta. He's a good and kind. Oh, there is only Daddy. Madge could only kiss her again, with murmured words of comfort. Then she had to go to her class and leave her alone. The robin came in 10 minutes later and snuggled up to where she sat on the couch. Tante Marguerite sent me, she murmured. Poor Elisaveta. Never mind. God will look after your papa, just as he did mine when he was in that horrid Russia. I used to ask him every night, and he did. He's always splendid. Elisaveta smiled through her tears and put her arms round the baby. You're a darling, she said chokingly. I think you're the dearest baby I ever knew. Tante Marguerite says so too, said the Robert comfortably. The princess nodded as she dried her eyes with fierce scrubbing of her handkerchief. Let's go out to the lake, suggested the robin, slipping down from her seat. We may, if we like. Shall we? Elisaveta got up. Yes, she said, the lake is always beautiful. They wandered out and down to the lake path, where the visitors were strolling about. The robin led the way to the boat landing past the great Crown Prince Carl. One of the pretty lake steamers was just coming in, gleaming spotlessly in the bright July sunshine. She was heavily laden, for a number of visitors were in her, coming to one or other of the big hotels which had been built round the lake. The two children watched her with interest as she drew into the little landing stage, where the porters were waiting to carry the luggage to its destination. Many people were watching too, and they cast interested glances at the two who were quite obviously from the school, which had grown up further along the shore. The two were so very pretty. The robin, brown and rosy and dimpled, Elisaveta, slim and graceful, with long brown curls tied back, and deep brown eyes set in flower-like face. They themselves were far too interested in the Scholastica and her passengers to heed anyone on shore, and they had not been standing 5 minutes before the robin suddenly gave a little ecstatic crow of delight. "It's Gisla and Bernhilda and Wanda," she cried. "Look, Elisaveta. Oh, how nice! Tante Marguerite will be pleased." Elisaveta looked and saw 3 girls, all about 18 years old, and all smiling and waving to the baby, who was dancing about excitedly. Even the princess could not feel anything but delight. She had heard so much about these 3. Gisla had been the first head girl of the Chalet School. Bernhilda was the elder sister of her own friend, Frida, and Wanda had passed into sort of fairy legend among the younger girls. When anyone said anything about Marie's looks, everyone was always certain to say, "Oh, but think of Wanda. She's much, much lovelier." Elisaveta had grown to think of this wonderful girl as being like the fairy princess of one of her adorned fairy tales, and for a wonder she was not disappointed. Wanda was exquisitely lovely and golden-haired, deep violet eyes, and skin of rose and lily. The 3 saw the robin and waved excitedly to her. They made a rush as soon as they could get to shore and catched her up, simply devoured her with kisses. "What are you doing in Bakchin?" demanded Bernhilda, when at length they sat her down and came to earth. "I am with Elisaveta," explained the robin. "She is sad because her father is ill, so we are here to watch the boats instead of lessons." The girls had heard of the little princess of Belsornia, and at once turned to her with sympathetic smiles. "It was in the New Free Press," said Gisla. "I'm so sorry." "Come," said the robin eagerly. "You must come now at once to the chalet. But first speak to Papa," said Grizel, half turning to a short man who had been watching them with quiet smile. The robin at once went up to him, her face held up for a kiss. She knew Herr Marini very well, for she and Bettany and Juliet had often stayed with him and his family in Innsbruck. He gave in to her at once, and then she pulled him over to Elisaveta. "This is Elisaveta," she said. He took the little hand to his. "I had heard of you, my child. I feel for you in your sorrow." Elisaveta clung to his hand eagerly. "It will be all right, won't it?" she said. "He has Dr. Tracy, and I'm asking God all the while." The Tréline nodded gravely. Like all his happy clan, he was very deeply religious, with a simplicity of faith which could understand the child's own belief that if only she asked God for help, it must be all right. "It is safe with him," he said in his gentle voice. "God and Our Lady will help you, however it goes." Then it turned to the others. "Shall we not go to the chalet?" he said. They agreed at once, and while the robin trotted ahead with Bernhilda and Wanda, Gisla and Herr Marini came in the rear, Elisaveta still holding fast to his hand. Two men who had been the last to leave the steamer before she steamed away to Gislem, further up the lake, looked after them curiously. "Who is that?" growled the taller of the two handsome men, whose beauty was marred by many lines and a haughty air. "I do not know, Highness," replied his companion. "Rudolfo has sent one of his own men to guard the brat?" said the other. The shorter man, who was evidently afraid of his friend, shook his head. "Indeed, Highness, I cannot tell you," he said earnestly. His Highness, Prince Cosmo, heir after the crown prince to the crown of Belsornia, scowled in reply. "It would just be like Carlo to make a fuss and get him to do it," he growled. "They thinks as much of the brat as if she were a boy and could inherit." Maurice Ternecki looked anxious, as well as he might. His master was never easy to get on with, and if anything went wrong with their carefully laid plans, he knew who would have to suffer for it. Luckily, Cosimo turned down his own fear. "I'm wrong. Why should they fear me? Did I not go from His Most Gracious Majesty of Belsornia, after listening to the most scathing remarks on my latest escapade, as he was pleased to call it, without a murmur? Surely he must think that I am well on the road to reformation. It was a piece of luck that you should hit on her in the Zillerthal. We might have traveled the whole continent over before we lighted on her, had it not been for that. You served me well, then, I shall not forget." Ternecki looked gratified, but he still watched his royal master cautiously. Cosimo glanced at him impatiently. "Good heavens, man, can you not cease to look at me as though you feared I should kick you if it pleased me? Now remember, after this, no more Royal Highness. I am merely Signor Carlo Belsarni, traveling for pleasure, and to see the world, as all good Belsornians should do. What is the proverb? See the world, and then thank God you are a Belsornian." He laughed. Ternecki was swift to fall in with the humor, and when they turned in at the Stephanie, where rooms had been booked for Mr. Ternecki and friend, they were both in high good humor. Meanwhile, Lisaveta, quite unwittingly of her danger, walked to the chalet, saying very little, but feeling the fatherly protection in the warm hand that clasped hers. They were met by the head, who had a great gladness in her eyes. Catching Lisaveta in her arms, she said with a sob in her voice, "All is well, darling. A wire has just come, and your father has recovered consciousness. He will get better from his concussion soon, and the broken leg is only a matter of time." Elisaveta clung to her. "Is it true?" she gasped. "Quite true, honey. Here's the telegram." She put it into the child's hand, and then turned to welcome her guests. "I am so glad to see you. It is splendid to have any old girls back again. We shall be going to a meal soon, in a few minutes. There will be a great excitement when the girls see you." They went in, leaving Elisaveta still standing, reading and rereading the precious wire which had brought back her happiness. She forgot all about the meal, while Joey came to fetch her, and then she could do nothing but beam at them all, while she hugged it to herself. "Poor kid," said Miss Bethany, watching her from the staff table. "She was heartbroken over the letter a while ago. I think she hardly realizes that it is all right now." Then the talk turned to the school, and they forgot Elisaveta for the time being. When the meal was over, Miss Bethany announced that, as 3 old girls had come at once, she would excuse all the lessons for the afternoon, and they would have a picnic in the pine woods instead. Joe said, "Won't it be gorgeous, a picnic in the woods? And it's so hot today. I say, Elisaveta," she went on in an undertone, "I'm awfully glad your father's getting better. We all are, you know. I expect it's partly that as well, really." "What is?" asked Elisaveta, bewildered. "Why, the whole... Of course. Well, get Margia and the others, and go Balberine hunting. Shall we? Then Marie might make us some jam, if we pick enough, that is. And don't let's eat all that we pick, added Juliet, who had caught the last part of the speech. Are you going to take Rufus, Joey? Rather, Rufus loves picnics, replied Joey, who was devoted to the big St. Bernard dog, which had rescued from a watery grave when he was a puppy of a few days old. They all rushed about after the meal was over, getting ready and nearly driving Marie to distraction with their demands. At last they were all ready, and then they set off, Rufus leading the way with big bounds, while the girls streamed along behind, carrying baskets full of everything they could find. They would have to be back early, so the visitors might catch the last boat, as they had only come for the day. So they were all determined to make the most of their time. The spot they made for was a cool, shady opening among the trees, where they often took their meals on holidays. They all knew it by this time, and the Middles rushed happily onward to set their baskets down and make all their arrangements quickly. Marie had put the coffee into flasks, as it was forbidden to light fires among the trees. It had been a very dry summer, and everything was like tinder. Flasks were not so romantic as a gypsy fire, as Joey remarked, but they did save trouble. The girls found their camping ground, planted the things ready, and then went off on their various amusements, leaving Miss Bethany to entertain Herr Marini and the juniors while they scattered, some to get sticks and to take home to Marie, who always declared that no sticks heated her stove as well as those brought from the woods in handfuls, others to wander among the trees, and the members of that done with society, the SSM, to gather bilberries for the jam they all loved. The robin had attached herself to Joey and Elizaveta, who picked together, so she kept them from making any wild experiments, as they had to look after her. It was just as well. Joey's imagination was given to running wild when she was excited, and generally led her and the other people into scrapes. As it was, the three climbed about the lower slopes of the mountain, picking as fast as they could, and bluing their fingers and mouths with the berries. Their wanderings led them away from the others, and presently they found themselves near a little path which led over the shoulder of the mountain to the sea-spits. It was little used, as it was a wearisome way, and only the folks of the Tyrn Valley troubled it as a rule. This afternoon it lay in the hot sunshine, solitary and warm, with the tiny green beetles creeping over it, and shy woodland things running along it. Joey pointed to a felled log, which lay nearby. "Let's go and sit down for a minute or two," she said. "I'm awfully hot." "And the robin looks tired," Elizaveta chimed in. "I'm no tireder than you are," said the robin indignantly. "I can walk ever so far, can't I, Zoe?" "You can," agreed Joey, "all the same. It would be not a bad idea to rest a bit before we go back. Come on." They trotted over to it and disposed themselves comfortably on it. "We've got lots of berries," said Elizaveta, tilting her basket to look at its contents the better. "Do you think there'll be enough for jam, Joey?" "Rather. Enough if the others have got as many as us. To make jam for the whole winter," declared Joey. "Off, I'm hot." She mopped her face with a handkerchief and looked as if it had been used for a pen wiper, and then leaned back against a branch which had been left on the log. "Let's sing," she proposed. "Well, sing something I know," pleaded Elizaveta. "Right-o!" Joey wriggled a little further back, and then opened her mouth. "Das liebe klein Bankchen hier ist." The others took it up at the end of the first line, singing gaily of the dear little tree which had grown up with the singer. They all sang well, but Joey has a golden voice, and round and clear, with something of the unearthly sweetness of a chorister's notes in it. It filled the lazy summer air and reached the ears of two who had come there to discuss their plans. At the sound they started. "Boys' voices," said the smaller of the two. "Noisy brats," remarked his companion, but as the clear notes welled up, even he listened. The song finished, and there was a pause, and then the voices began again. They sang, "The Woodman," and there was silence. "Go and fetch some here, Turnicky," said the bigger man.